Justin. Thank you for your time to interview. So I'll just introduce myself. I'm Jake Watson. I am a principal data engineer at Oakland Group, and I also run a weekly newsletter on all things to do with data, and mainly how to build and design and maintain a data platform that it's sent out. Yeah. And would you like to just briefly introduce yourself?
Sure. Yeah, happy to. I'm Justin Borgman, co-founder and CEO of Starburst. Starburst is the company behind an open source project called Trino. And essentially, we provide a data lake analytics platform that allows you to query data that lives both in the lake and outside of the lake. So we can really query data that lives anywhere. And that's part of what sets us apart from other platforms in the industry.
Thank you. That was very great summary. I was going to structure, I was just going to structure this interview in sort of like in the classic sort of like looking at your past and then probably current. So we're looking at sort of like what are the current issues and themes of today, and then a bit on the future, with possibly some segues into some maybe data later if we get time. So just starting at the past. But I'll try and keep it sort of like in the present as well for people who don't like to dwell too long on the past, as tech is always trying to think of the present and the future. So one of the first things you did was started a Hadoop startup, Hadapt. And what do you think are like the key lessons from that Hadoop era that can be applied today? Because I feel like its file-based structures sort of like come back around again with data lakehouses.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think that is the lasting legacy of the Hadoop era. I mean, really, the notion of a data lake was created during that period. I mean, the first data lakes were absolutely Hadoop data lakes, and that's where that term came to be. And I think the concept of a data lake is going to, I think potentially live on forever, because there are so many natural benefits. I mean, the notion of leveraging open data formats, was something pioneered by Hadoop, with the creation of Parquet files and ORC files and Avro files, and all these different ways of storing data in a columnar fashion to still get good performance, but laid out in this really inexpensive, commodity storage system. And I think that's another key, legacy of Hadoop, is this notion of, let's store as much data as we possibly can in the cheapest possible place we can store it. And that's, either going to be, the Hadoop file system, classically, or today, more often, it's object storage. It's S3 on Amazon, or it's Azure Data Lake Storage or Google Cloud Storage. All of them represent that inexpensive storage. And then, lastly, I would say this notion of open architectures was really pioneered back then, at least as it pertains to, data warehousing analytics. The notion that not only are your data formats open and your file storage, inexpensive and open, but also that the means for how you process that data should perhaps also be open. And so you have the rise of technologies like Presto and Trino, which we're the creators of, or Spark, as another example, and the idea that these engines can all query the same open data formats, I think, was a really important aspect of the architecture that, again, lives on today. Now, I think while Hadoop itself may be waning in popularity, again, a lot of these concepts live on and have simply moved to the cloud and cloud object storage.
Cool. That's a good answer. And you soon moved into Teradata, which looks out from the outside in like a very different kind of company. I could be wrong there. It could be like it's complete. I don't want to say too, because they're still going strong as a company as well to this day, and still innovating. So I would say, would you say it was was it very different work for a large enterprise compared to a startup?
Yeah. Yeah. No, please.
And yeah, I was just going to say, did it sort of like alter your thinking about how to approach future startups when you sort of like came back to founding Starburst?
Yeah, I think, two great observations from my time at Teradata. First and foremost, that enterprise customers, where Teradata really is very strong, have, particular needs and requirements that internet companies don't have. They need more robust access controls. They need better governance. They need, metadata management and catalog support, and just Kerberos integration, LDAP integration, so many different sort of features and capabilities that, frankly, somebody like Facebook just doesn't really care about, but mainstream, enterprise customers very much do. And so that left an impression on sort of what it means to be quote unquote enterprise grade. The other observation was maybe a little bit more specific to Teradata, which is that they were really the pioneer of this idea of an enterprise data warehouse, which was always about centralizing all of your data into one central data warehouse. And yet when I got there, I realized that not one of their customers actually did that. Not one of them actually had everything in the enterprise data warehouse. They all had these different data silos, data marts, different applications, device data, multiple clouds, on-prem, so much heterogeneity inherent to the operation of their business that this enterprise data warehouse model seemed like it was actually impossible. And that was pretty interesting to see from the Teradata vantage point, because of course, at least at the time when my company was acquired, they were 2.7 billion in revenue. They were the industry leader. So this was like the best in class version of the enterprise data warehouse. And yet even there, their customers didn't truly centralize everything. So that was really what started to get me thinking about, we need a design, we need an architecture that actually accommodates for data living outside of this central data warehouse.
Yeah, it's probably, I agree, from my experience of seeing large companies try their best to even just try and get people just to use one platform, like one cloud platform, can be just too much work, let alone trying to put it in one technology. It only really seems to work well if you got like a laser focus from a product sort of thing, and probably hence why I suppose data products came about, was because if you don't have a strong focus, you're gonna struggle to meet your goals.
Yeah.
It actually comes on to sort of like my next question there. I was going to talk about how you sort of like sit with like centralized and decentralized sort of like with teams and technologies, but you sort of half answered that already. Where you sort of like maybe stand in like there's a current, I wouldn't say fight, but there's sort of like there's sort of like two opinions of like data fabric and data mesh out there, and I'm wondering what your opinions on them are.
Yep. Yeah, so I think, first of all, I'll start with the commonality, which is that I think both of them recognize that you need to be able to account for decentralized data. And I think the differences lie in sort of how you actually put that into practice, how you govern that, how you manage that. And at least the way that we think about it with our customers is there are certain elements that you certainly want to centralize, and those are the things around security and access controls, management and administration of the data platform. Those aspects likely need to be centralized. And then I think it really depends on your organizational maturity in a way, your data maturity, data literacy, perhaps, in terms of who produces data products, who's responsible for data quality. And that perhaps influences just how much further you decentralize those processes or not. And that's more a people and process challenge than a technology one. And that's sort of the advice that I give customers. Like, you need a technology that can handle, your decentralized data, whether you choose to centralize the management, the administration, the governance, and even the data quality. comes down to sort of the maturity of your decentralized teams. In the greatest embrace of a data mesh philosophy, you would have those domain owners being the ones who curate and create those data products, and they're responsible for that data quality. And I think there are a lot of benefits to that approach, but I think you have to ask yourself, like, are we ready for that today? Do we have the people and process to facilitate that level of decentralization? Or does it make more sense to sort of still have a centralized team that can simply reach out and access the decentralized data?
Yeah. I was gonna, so it sounded like both can kind of work depending on the maturity of your company. I have seen some people talk about it sort of like merging them both together, so you get like a best of both worlds approach, almost like a Goldilocks principle, where you use like the graph, knowledge graph of data fabric with the decentralized of data mesh. I don't know if you've ever seen it or have thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's interesting. I certainly haven't heard it expressed that way before. Yeah, no, that's an interesting idea. I mean, I think it makes sense. Conceptually, it makes sense.
All right. Yeah, it's all just emerging in its own way as people trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
So just moving on to data products, I'd say Starburst has been leading the charge in terms of data products and getting them sort of like become the de facto way of how we look at breaking up our data and authors. So, and now we're starting to see an adoption of them in a lot of the companies now, with use cases and that. Have you seen any unexpected benefits of issues with data products now that we're starting to see them come into production?
Mm-hmm. I think one unexpected, or maybe it should be expected, but benefit that we see, or maybe it's more of a benefit than people expect, I guess I should say, is that people are talking more. There's greater collaboration between consumer and producer than I think historically there is, because I think, in the more traditional model, the data producer is sort of an anonymous, faceless, human that we don't know as a data consumer, right? And so if there are areas to be improved in that data product, whether it's adding additional fields or what have you, I don't really even know how to begin to send that feedback back to the producer, or even to ask questions of the data. Sometimes it's simply just trying to understand the data that exists better. But with data products, we're really facilitating that consumer producer interchange, if you will, and interaction. And I think that's where people really start to see some of the unexpected benefits, to your question, of a data products model, data product centric model.
Yeah. You have stronger thought on about that producer thought. There has been a lot of talk about that with data contracts, trying to sort of like bring that to the fore. One question I've been going over in my mind, will we start seeing like a blurring of the boundary between operational and analytical planes where they work closer together, or will it still be just two distinct layers and it's better to keep them, separate?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think that hopefully we will see more collaboration between those two planes in terms of, I guess the interaction around like what the schema should contain, right? Like, the operational side very often is not necessarily aware of what the analytical side finds valuable in terms of that data capture. And so hopefully there is greater collaboration between the two. I don't think the actual underlying database systems will necessarily converge. I mean, every now and then people talk about that. Well, we have a OLAP and OLTP, database that does both. I think that's a little bit more of a challenge around physics of just being read optimized versus write optimized. But I think hopefully greater collaboration between the humans involved on those two sides, because I do think there's a lot of value there.
That's good. Thank you. Moving on to data catalogs, I've noticed now that Starburst Gravity has come out, and you had previously with data products, which looks really interesting. what I've started to notice, I've started to see like catalogs being introduced into into data processing products, or into even data orchestration with Dagster, and you've got Databricks with Unity Catalog. Do you think this is going to be an increasing trend where we see people just have like more where they sort of like lean more into data governance?
Yes, I think in conjunction with some of the points you brought up earlier around data being decentralized, the role of the catalog becomes more important and more essential, almost like table stakes for the whole thing to work, because you now need to account for data that lives outside of one single database. And so yes, I think this is a theme, and becoming increasingly a required capability for customers.
I'm tempted to be a bit sneaky and say, are you gonna sort of like start to expand out Gravity as you go on over the years, or is that something under NDA?
Yeah, no, we do intend to expand it. I mean, I think our mission is to make distributed architectures as easy and seamless as possible for our customers, and that means that anything that we can do to make that a more streamlined experience is within scope from our standpoint. And that's everything from metadata management to access controls. Of course, we now provide in Galaxy, our SaaS product, we provide attribute-based access control, role-based access control, very fine-grained access control. You know, those things we think as well are sort of table stakes, and being able to centrally define those, but enforce them across all the different data sources you connect to, has a lot of value for customers. So yes, I think all of those things are in scope.
Cool. Look forward to it. There's been a few calls saying that like big data is dead. I don't know if you've seen like the famous Mother Duck article.
Yes.
That's come through. As someone that's probably from the original days of big data, you might, I know some people said big data never actually happened. So it'd be quite good to have your take on, did it happen? Is it still happening? That sort of thing.
Yeah. Sure. I mean, I disagree with the idea that big data is dead. I mean, I think that it makes sense for Mother Duck to say that. And I think DuckDB is a great database system. There will always be point solutions, specific use case solutions for specific problems. You know, one of my greatest influences from a database perspective is Mike Stonebreaker, who's a professor at MIT here in Boston, where I'm based. He is the creator of Ingress and Postgres and Vertica and so many different database systems. He won the Turing Award winner. You know, he's probably one of the leading computer scientists of our time, and certainly as it pertains to databases. And one of his most famous statements was that there's no one size fits all database, and that you're always going to have purpose-built database systems. And I think that's absolutely true. And I think DuckDB is just like an example of that. But the idea that, you know, big data is dead, or that we don't need to analyze all of our data or something to that effect, I think is certainly not true. And I think with the increasing attention towards LLMs and generative AI, if anything, I would say big data is more alive than ever before, because your models are only as good as the data that you train them on. And very often, at least as it pertains to LLMs, more data is usually better to have an even, more accurate model. So, and I think also understanding your business holistically is really important. So, while we don't think you'll centralize all your data in one data warehouse, we think that having access to as much data as possible is really, really important.
Cool, and that sort of brings me, in mentioning LLMs, brings me on to sort of like my obligatory generative AI question, because you can't have, it's not, for some people, it's all they can talk about at the moment. And I know you've got, I know from what I've seen of reading your link, reading Starburst's posts, that they are looking internally. So I'm wondering what are going to be Starburst's future with LLMs? Are you going to sort of like integrate into your products, or think of other ways of like communicating with them?
Yeah, so I think a couple ways. I think first of all, within the product itself, we've already got actively prototyped and something that we'll be introducing soon, the notion of natural language to SQL translation. And I think that's low-hanging fruit for the industry. I don't think that we'll be alone in offering that. I think many vendors will likely offer that. It's actually fairly straightforward to just be able to take natural language and turn those into SQL queries. I think the harder stuff that is maybe even slightly more interesting because it's hard is the automatic curation and creation of data products. Back to your earlier question, can we help facilitate and present data products that data consumers are going to find valuable in their analysis? And so that's a little bit longer lead time, but also an area that we think is really interesting. And then I'll say broadly, by virtue of us being able to provide access to all of the data in your enterprise, we want to be the access layer to help you as a customer, build and train your own LLMs that are really specific to your business and derive proprietary competitive advantage for you, right? I think ChatGPT is a great technology to experiment with, to have some fun with. But I think where the real value is going to come from enterprise customers is when they're training their own, leveraging their own proprietary enterprise data, and that won't be ChatGPT, most likely, right? Because you certainly don't want GPT training on your data. So so I think those are the types of things that are very interesting from our perspective.
Yeah, I'm constantly interested to see how it's going to turn out, where we are going to end up with like open source models like we had with the previous ML cycles, or OpenAI, or everyone's going to end up using OpenAI, which has some concerns probably for many people if one model and company dominates it all.
Yeah, no, I will say, and obviously we're big believers in open source in general. I do think the open source LLM world is just getting going, and I think that'll be a really big force, because I think, to your point, people aren't going to want to trust a vendor with their data, and I think these open source models are getting really good.
Yeah. Moving on to data leadership, I usually get, I like to put a question in there because I usually get asked sort of like how, because I often get asked how to become a data leader, and I've noticed that you're quite tech, you come from a technical background, and you might even still be somewhat hands-on. I'm not too sure.
I can demo our product. That was, somebody challenged me in an all hands internally if I could demo our product. I can, but there are people here way smarter than me. So anyways,
that's fair. But I know there's some and there's always usually debates in every company where it's sort of like, does the CTO commit code, or is that a bad thing to do, that sort of thing. So I suppose the question is, it's sort of like, how do you balance running a large business while still sort of like understanding your customers' needs and delivering the technology they need to run their businesses?
I think the key is you have to find the right balance between time spent internally versus externally. And what I mean by that is, spending time with customers, to me, is it's almost like oxygen. Like I need it. It helps inform our product roadmap. And it goes back to like that old saying, if you ask somebody 120 years ago what they want in terms of personal transportation, they would say, I want a faster horse. You have to really spend time with customers to understand that they actually don't want a faster horse. They just want to get from point A to point B faster, and that maybe a car actually would be the better way to do that. And so, if you want to make revolutionary change, disruptive change, and not just incremental change, you really have to spend a lot of time with your customers, empathizing and understanding their challenges at a very root level, because otherwise you just listen to what they say. And an average product manager can do that. Okay, faster horse. We'll go see if we can work on the horse's diet or something and get 5% more speed out of a horse. But the person that really lives with that customer and spends a lot of time with them realizes the real underlying requirement and can come up with creative solutions that might actually be more transformative to their lives. So to me, that's huge, and something that I don't think any leader should ever lose sight of. But at the same time, you also need to spend time internally too. Otherwise, things don't get done. So it's finding the right balance.
Yeah, and there's probably there's also looking at sort of like trying to look at future customer sort of like end up with like a freeway thing where there's internal, there's also your current customers, and there's also the wider ecosystem. I wouldn't say prospective customers, but there's also you're not just talking to prospective customers, you're talking to virtually everyone where you listening to sort of like Joe Rice or Chad Sanderson about what is the latest things coming around the corner. Just making sure you're just keeping up with what's the latest trends.
Absolutely.
Sorry, I don't need a bit of a lecture, but
no, totally agree. It's a dynamic ecosystem that's always changing, always evolving, and you need to be consciously aware of that. Nothing in our space is ever static.
Yeah. And to finally finish, what trends? So 2023 is already sort of like 6 months past. So I can't tell you what trends are going to emerge in 2023. But so what do you think will emerge in the mainstream in 2024 then, sort of thing? What do you think is going to appear in the next year?
Well, I have to say you're the first one to ask me for 2024 predictions. So I guess this will be my first 2024 prediction here in the summer. But I will say, I think that, going back to some of your questions around generative AI, I think like vector databases will be an interesting thing to watch. I think open file formats, or I'll say like modern open file formats or next generation open file formats like Iceberg, I think will be gaining a lot of momentum. We're seeing that already. I think that will continue. I think Iceberg, will win the table format war. Maybe that's the most provocative thing I'll say today, and just become the dominant table format. So, those are a couple of things I think. Vector databases, Iceberg, and then, broadly, I'll just say I think increased focus on collaboration and data products. Like, how do we create that collaboration and that two-way dialogue between data domain owner and data consumer. So I think data products will be big next year as well.
Yeah, I agree with all of them. Just you have reminded me that with file formats, it's become also an explosion of innovation where we had CSVs for a long time and then Parquet for a while. And then since we've had with Lakehouse formats, it's just sort of exploded, and it just keeps on going. And it's sort of like we don't know what the limits are going to be there.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you for your time.
My pleasure.
It's been great speaking to you. I hope you have a nice day.
Likewise. Take care.